She was only 16 when she was taken to the Sliven bride market, but not to fall in love. It was a contract, a payment, a silent sentence for something she never chose. Mariya thought her life would end there, amidst glances that weighed like hands and smiles that hid cages. But when she held a stranger's hand, she began an escape that no one was ready to accept. And what seemed like a simple story of tradition turned out to be a labyrinth of lies, debts, threats, and survival. This is the realistic, intense, and devastating journey of a young woman who dared to say no, where everyone else said yes. Watch until the end. You won't be able to forget the last few minutes. She woke to the sound of voices in the kitchen, muffled murmurs, tense laughter, hurried footsteps on the worn wooden floor. It was Saturday, the day when everything changed in Sliven, but Mariya didn't know it yet. She was 16, her hair braided simply, and her eyes wide and dark. They already seemed to carry an old fear. It was strangely quiet in her room that morning, as if the air hesitated to touch the curtains. She put on her itchy wool sweater and went downstairs. Even before she reached the kitchen, she felt that the atmosphere had changed. Her mother was smiling in a way that was unlike her. Her father, who had barely spoken during breakfast, seemed cheerful. And next to him was an unfamiliar man. Tall, dressed in street clothes, his shoes too shiny for someone who was supposedly from the neighborhood. Mariya stopped at the door, and the man turned his face to her. He looked at her as if he already knew her, as if he had already decided something. "Ah, here is the morning star," said the mother, pulling her with forced sweetness. Her father stood up and placed his hand on her shoulder, firmly, as if to hold her there. The man smiled. It was a smile without warmth. He didn't extend his hand to shake hers. He just looked her up and down and nodded. Mariya didn't understand what was happening, but she felt the morning chill settle in her chest. Later, alone in her room, she heard the conversation behind the thin wall. There was no more laughter, only numbers. 1,300 takes, and only because it's for today. She looks good, and can she cook? She better know how. Oh, voices discussing her worth as if she were an animal. Her father didn't argue. Her mother said it would be better this way, that there was no other way. Mariya, motionless in bed, realized that she wasn't sick with fear, she was rotting inside. A part of her was dying silently, without screams, just with absence. Everyone in the village knew the stories. The bride market was held in Sliven Square, near the food stalls and colorful fabrics. It was presented as a tradition, a gathering of families. But everyone knew, here, youth was sold in exchange for promises and money. Some girls even smiled. They were taught to smile. But Mariya was not one of them. That night, she tried to talk to her mother. They sat on the porch, both of them with blankets around their shoulders, watching the clear sky. Mariya waited for the silence to break. "Mom, did you sell me?" The mother took a while to answer. She didn't look at her. "Life is not like the books, daughter. Sometimes it's better not to have a choice." Better for whom? For those who stay, for those who survive. Silence returned, this time with the taste of farewell. The mother cried, but her eyes remained dry. It was as if crying was just a mechanical gesture, devoid of feeling. The next day, Mariya woke up with the dress on her bed. White, new, but not pretty. It wasn't made for her. It was made to be shown off, to be seen. Her grandmother helped her dress without saying a word, only making the sign of the cross before braiding her hair. Outside, the car was waiting. The man was at the wheel. Her father didn't come to say goodbye. Her mother kissed her on the forehead, almost too quickly. The door slammed behind her, and Mariya felt like someone who had left her body behind. On the way to the market, the city looked like a painting she couldn't touch. The trees passed by like spots, the faces like shadows. No one there knew that she didn't want that her heart was begging for a way back that didn't exist. They arrived early. The man didn't say anything during the journey. When he got out, he opened the door for her as if opening a store window. The square was already full. Music was playing, families were chatting, girls were being led by the arms. Mariya was led to a kind of exhibition bench. Other girls waited there, most of them silent. Some were crying silently. The man walked away to talk to others while she sat down. A group of boys approached and walked by slowly, looking at each one as if they were choosing an animal at the butcher's. One of them stopped in front of Mariya. He smiled. She looked away, but she felt his eyes burning into her skin. "This one is a wimp," he said, laughing. "She doesn't even know how to smile yet." The others laughed. Mariya felt her throat close up. She wanted to scream, to run, to disappear, but she didn't move. She stood there, like a poorly sewn doll, holding her dress with her fingers as if it were protection. The sun was rising in the sky, and the negotiations began. One man was already asking the age of a girl next to him. Another was carrying a thick envelope. Mariya realized that no one cared about them. They were numbers, prices, and she was a label in a market of illusions. Then she saw in the distance an older woman being dragged away by a man. She screamed that she didn't want to, but no one intervened. This was part of the deal, they said. Mariya understood. No one would come for her. No one would save anyone here. What lay before her was not a marketplace. It was a funeral of choices. And then a voice beside him, low, quick. "If you want to get out of here, come with me, now." She turned her head slowly. A boy, about 2 years older, was standing next to the bench. He wasn't from around here. He was wearing a backpack, dirty sneakers, and had the look of someone who knew the risk. "Who are you?" she whispered. "A mistake, but perhaps the only one you'll ever have a chance to make." He reached out his hand. Mariya looked around. The man who had brought her was distracted. No one was paying attention. The sun shone on their empty faces. And here she was, with an impossible chance. She took a deep breath and held his hand. They ran without looking back. Mariya didn't know where she was going, didn't know who the boy was who was now pulling her hand through the aisles of the crowded square. But for the first time in many days, she felt her heart beating with something other than fear. It was impulse. It was urgency. It was the most primitive instinct of freedom. They passed behind stalls, between hanging fabrics, and she almost fell when she tripped over a crate of fruit. He held her tightly and murmured, "A little more, just a little more." The crowd seemed to have disappeared behind them, but she could still feel the sound of their footsteps weighing on her shoulders. As if the entire market might turn at any moment and shout that she was breaking some invisible rule. As if the simple act of refusing her fate was an unforgivable heresy. The boy led her to an alley behind a disused butcher shop where the smells of rust and mold seemed to tell forgotten stories. "Wait here," he said breathlessly. "Just a second." He walked over to a bicycle leaning against the wall and pulled 2 crumpled backpacks out of an old box. He tossed one to her. Mariya took it, puzzled. "Put this one on. If anyone asks, we're brothers. We're going to visit our grandmother." She didn't know what to say. She had no idea how to trust someone who had come out of nowhere and taken her away from what seemed inevitable. But she also knew that going back would mean being silent for the rest of her life. And she couldn't bear that. As they walked along dirt roads, avoiding the main sidewalks, he told them his name was Stefan. He was from another village and had come with friends to see what the market was like. But it revolted him. He said it was a crime disguised as culture, that people pretended not to see it because it was easier to live that way. Mariya listened, but her mind was elsewhere. She could still hear the boys' laughter, could still see the eyes of the shopper who was watching her, as if she were a piece of meat. They stopped at an abandoned gas station on the side of the road. Stefan took a bottle of water from his backpack and offered it to her. Mariya hesitated, then accepted it. She drank in silence, not daring to look at her own reflection in the broken glass of the window next to her. "Do you think they've noticed yet?" she asked, almost in a whisper. "Yes, of course. But there's no way of knowing where we went. The city has dozens of routes. We'll catch a train later. A friend can help us in Sofia. At least for today, you're free." She smiled for the first time in days. But it was a crooked, broken smile, like someone who no longer knows how to do it. There was a crack in her soul, and Mariya knew it wouldn't go away so easily. Stefan noticed. He didn't comment. He just placed his hand on her shoulder gently. "You are strong, Mariya. They are the ones who are weak in character. They spent hours hiding. They waited for the sun to set." Stefan seemed to have a plan, or he pretended to. She didn't know which option was scarier. At dusk, they made their way to the city's old station. It was a place where time seemed to have stopped. Peeling walls, rusty benches, a stopped clock that read 10 past 11. There he met a lady who seemed to be waiting for them. Her name was Genya. She didn't speak much, but her eyes said everything. "Come in," she said, opening the door of an old house next to the station. "It's just for tonight. Tomorrow life starts again." Inside the house, the smell was of incense and wood. A kettle hissed on the stove. Blankets were spread over a small sofa, and old books were piled on the windowsills. Genya made tea and watched them silently, as if trying to decipher a wound that could not be seen. "You did the right thing, girl," he said after a long time. "But now you need to know, running away is just the beginning. What comes next is harder." Mariya didn't answer. She knew it was true. Running away was action. Living with the consequences was resistance. During the night, she did not sleep. She listened to the noises of the street, each footstep echoing like a warning. At some point, she heard Stefan whispering to Genya. She did not understand everything, but she caught one phrase. "If her father comes here, you know what to do." She felt her body go cold. The image of her father, silent, indifferent, came back with a vengeance. Would he really come? Out of anger? Out of pride? Or just to get his money back? The next morning before sunrise, Genya woke them both up. "Just take the essentials. The train leaves in 30 minutes. You have to disappear before anyone sniffs it out." Mariya put on her shoes without thinking. Her feet hurt, her body was tired, but fear gave her more strength than any hope. At the station, the tracks seemed too long. When the train finally arrived, she looked back. No one, just the silence of the city that never let anyone leave without a mark. They boarded. Inside the carriage, the world seemed different. There were children laughing, old people dozing, tired mothers. It was just an ordinary train, like any other. But to her, it was a mechanical miracle. A straight line to a place where no one would put a price on it. Stefan sat down next to her. He gave a slight smile. "In 2 hours, we'll be in Sofia. Then we'll think about what to do." She nodded. She looked out the window. The countryside was slowly passing by. It was green, it was grey, it was all at once. And then, a figure in the distance, standing on the side of the road. A man in a dark coat, alone, watching the train. She squinted. The train was already passing quickly, but she was sure it was the father. His face was back in seconds, but the impact stuck in her stomach like a stone. Mariya leaned against the window, trying to convince herself that it was just someone who looked similar, that fatigue and trauma were distorting her vision. But deep down, she knew. That man standing at the edge of the line with the dark coat and the rigid posture, it was her father. And he saw them. He knew. The train continued on its course, cutting through the Bulgarian plains as if nothing was happening, but inside Mariya the storm was gathering. The silence between her and Stefan was thick. He looked at her with concern, noticing the change in her face. "Everything is fine." She hesitated, then whispered, I think I saw my father. He was there, on the road. He saw us. Stefan frowned, looked out the window as if he could still see the past rushing past them. He took a deep breath. Even if he saw it, he can't do anything now. You're on the move. And those who are on the move, Mariya, are harder to catch. She wanted to believe those words, but she couldn't. Her father was a silent man, yes. But he was the kind of man who didn't need to shout to make it clear that a promise had been made. And she felt it. It wasn't hurt pride. It was something more. That sale wasn't just a traditional agreement. There was something more behind it. Something she didn't know yet, but that gave weight to her father's steps and gravity to his absence in the goodbyes. When they arrived in Sofia, the world seemed different. Too many people, too many buildings, too much noise. Mariya felt her body shrink at the size of the city. They got off the train and walked along the crowded platforms to a side exit, where Stefan clicked on a text message on his cell phone. A short while later, an old car pulled up, and a woman with red hair, a tight ponytail and sunglasses, got out of the driver's seat. "Are you the fugitives?" he said, his voice hoarse and full of irony. "Come in, before you become statistics." Her name was Kalina. She worked for an NGO that supported girls who were victims of forced marriage and human trafficking. She had grown up on the outskirts of Plovdiv and had sworn as a child that she would never let other girls go through what her sister had gone through. Since then, she has taken on cases like Mariya's. But even with all her talk of strength, Kalina looked at Mariya as if she saw an irreparable crack. "It's going to be hard, but you've made it this far. That's more than many can do." In the simple house where she lived, Mariya had her first hot bath in days. She wore loose cotton clothes and ate fresh bread with hot soup. But she didn't speak. Her lips felt sealed inside. Everything there seemed like a dream, a momentary refuge surrounded by sharp memories. At night, she heard Kalina talking to Stefan in the hallway. "This girl isn't just any victim, is she? No. Her father is involved with some strange guys. It wasn't just an arranged marriage. There was more to it. You put her in a fire bigger than you can imagine, boy." Mariya couldn't sleep. She kept repeating her mother's words in her mind. Sometimes it's better not to have a choice, as if it were a curse that now echoed with every beat of her heart. The next morning, Kalina sat with her at the kitchen table. "I need to ask you something, Mariya. The man who would buy you, did you know him?" She shook her head, but then she hesitated. "No, but he knew my father." They talked as if they had already done other business. Kalina pursed her lips in thought. "That confirms what I feared. You weren't just a girl for a traditional marriage. You were payment for a debt." Mariya froze. "Debt? Yes. And when girls are used like that, it usually means one thing. Whoever wanted you won't give you up, not for love, but for pride and for money." Over the next few days, Kalina began the process of creating a new identity for Mariya. She had contacts, people in the system. She knew how to get in where no one would see her. But time was short. Stefan had returned to his village, promising not to contact her until it was safe. Mariya, alone in the apartment, began to have nightmares. She dreamed that she was back in the square, that the man with the shiny shoes was there, smiling, and next to him her father, silent, with his arms crossed, his eyes filled with disappointment and something worse, guilt. One of those nights, she woke up with a start. She was sure she had heard knocking on the door. Kalina was not at home. She had gone out to get documents. Mariya approached the door in silence. She looked through the peephole. Nobody. But there was something on the floor. An envelope. White. No sender. She opened it. Inside was a single photo. It was her, sitting at the train station the day she ran away. The image was clear, taken from a distance but clearly focused on her. And a handwritten note. You are mine until the end, no matter where you run." Mariya's hands shook as they held the paper. She read the sentence over and over, as if each repetition might alter its meaning. But it didn't. The handwriting was firm, dry, without flourishes, written like a promise or a sentence. She sat on the floor of the hallway, her back against the wall, her eyes fixed on the photo. Someone was watching. Someone knew where she was. And if they did, then Kalina was in danger too. She got up with effort and locked all the windows. The night seemed darker than before, heavier. The silence was no longer security, it was threat. She tried to call Kalina, but the phone was out of range. She tried again. Nothing. Time seemed to have stopped there, freezing each second in a suffocating wait. Every creak in the house sounded like a footstep in the hallway. Every shadow gained a face. She locked herself in the bathroom and sat there on the cold floor, her knees against her chest, waiting for time to forget her. Kalina only returned at dawn. She found Mariya curled up, her eyes red and the photo still in her hands. When she saw the contents of the envelope, Kalina didn't ask any questions. She just murmured, "They are already in Sofia." The next day, everything changed. Kalina made phone calls. She sent photos of the letter to contacts she called the dark side of the system. And then the name came to her, Radko. Stanev, the man who had traded Mariya to her father. A name known to the authorities, but never caught. Involved in human trafficking, extortion, and exploitation. Always on the fringes of the law, always one step ahead. But this time, Kalina knew he had crossed a different line. When a name like his is signed by something personal, it's not just business. It's obsession. Mariya listened to it all with a heavy heart. Each new piece of information was a piece of a puzzle she had never wanted to put together. She began to remember small details. Her father's look, her mother's hesitation, the white dress draped over the bed. It all made sense now. She was not just a daughter, she was the coin in a debt she had never asked to exist. Kalina decided to act quickly. She prepared false documents with the help of a lawyer who owed her old favors. A new name, Elena Petrova. A new age, a new city. Everything would start over. But first, they had to escape Sofia. There was a risk that they would be watched. And that was when Mariya heard the scariest idea since it all began. "Let's take her to Stara Zagora. There's a shelter there, underground, ancient, forgotten, but safe." Forgotten by whom? By those who may not remember. Within hours, they were on the road. A borrowed old car, the road covered in fog, and the silence between them was tense. Mariya tried to keep her eyes open, but she was too exhausted. Somewhere along the way, she dozed off. She dreamed of her father again. But this time he wasn't angry. He was crying, and he was saying, "I tried to protect you, but I chose wrong." She woke up with his voice still echoing in her ears. They arrived at the shelter at dawn, an old building under an abandoned church. Inside, stone walls, metal beds, and a smell of damp. But it was safe, and at that moment, it was all she needed. Kalina locked the main entrance with 3 chains. Mariya was placed in a small room with a bed and a window that looked out onto nothing. For the first time, she slept without interruption. Outside, however, the game was progressing. At the Sofia police station, a man came in wearing a dark suit and carrying a black briefcase. He asked to speak to the police officer in charge. He said he had a missing person report. He showed a photo of Mariya. He said she was his daughter, that she had been kidnapped by a woman with a criminal record and involvement in document forgery. The woman's name, Kalina Petrova. The commissioner asked questions. The man answered calmly. He showed the girl's birth certificate, an old birth certificate, a medical report. Everything looked legal. Everything looked official. "We will investigate," said the commissioner. The man thanked him. He smiled slightly and left. In the police station hallway, he took his cell phone out of his pocket and typed a single sentence. "She's hiding. I'll know where soon." Back at the shelter, Kalina was preparing her final plan. She told Mariya that she would have to travel alone to another country in 2 days. There was a family willing to take her in temporarily. Good people. But the journey would be long, and they couldn't make any mistakes. As they talked, Mariya tried to hide her fear, but it showed in her eyes. She no longer trusted anything, not windows, not doors, not the sound of her own name. That night, she decided to explore the corridors of the shelter. She needed to understand where she was. She needed control. She passed by old rooms, religious paintings covered in dust, melted candles, until she found a half-open door. She went in. It was an old confession room. Inside, a wooden cabinet. Curious, she opened it. Inside, boxes were stacked, old papers, folders, and at the bottom, a thick envelope with her name handwritten on it. Mariya opened it with trembling hands. Inside were photographs, copies of documents, a contract with her father's signature, and, along with all this, a letter written by him. "If you are reading this, it means you have chosen to flee, but know that your escape will cost more lives than you can imagine." The words in the letter seemed to carry physical weight. Mariya felt the paper burn between her fingers, as if it could change everything she believed about her own life. "Your escape will cost more lives than you can imagine." The sentence was short, but it carried the weight of something much greater than just a threat. She sat on the floor of the confession room, her eyes fixed on the stiff handwriting, her hands still shaking. She tried to continue reading, but her heart was racing so fast that it made it difficult to concentrate. "What I did was wrong, but not as wrong as what would have happened if I had said no. They gave me a choice, and I chose what I thought would keep you alive. Forgive me, Mariya, but now it's too late." She didn't know whether to cry, scream, or tear the paper. Her father wasn't just an accomplice, he was a hostage too. There was someone above him, someone who would put his own blood on the line to guarantee a silence that had been bought. Mariya felt the world crumble again, not in screams but in slow, dull cracks. Her father didn't just sell her for money, he sold her out of fear. Kalina entered the room when she heard the sound of the cabinet being closed. She saw the envelope in Mariya's hands. She approached silently, sitting down next to her. She read the girl's eyes before even reading the paper. "Did he leave you this?" Mariya nodded, unable to speak. Kalina picked up the letter carefully as if handling a piece of evidence. She read it silently. When she finished, she stood there, motionless, staring into space. He was trying to protect you in his own way, but that just shows how deep this web goes. What does that mean, Kalina? That it wasn't just a debt. Your father was part of something bigger, a web, a scheme, and you were the final payment, the perfect girl. Young, beautiful, obedient. They groomed you from an early age. And when the time came, you became the price to be paid. Mariya felt nauseous. She remembered all the time she had been prevented from going out alone. Her mother's advice to always dress modestly. Her constant fear of making a mistake, as if every wrong step was a punishment for someone other than herself. They had molded her. They had created a prison and called it home. That night, as Kalina tried to figure out how to break free, Mariya dreamed of her childhood. But everything was distorted. Her mother was combing her hair with iron threads. Her father was sewing her dress with flaming needles, and a shadow behind the door watched facelessly. She woke up gasping, covered in sweat, and realized that someone had tampered with the bedroom window. There were fingerprints on the fogged glass. But outside, and she was in an underground bunker. At the same moment, Kalina entered the room panting. "We need to go, now." Mariya didn't question it. She just stood up and put on her shoes. Kalina's face was tense, her hands were sweaty, and her phone was vibrating non-stop. They found out. I don't know how, but they're coming. We don't have time for plans anymore. We need to disappear. They left through the back door, following an emergency tunnel hidden beneath the stones of the chapel. The path was dark and stuffy, and the sound of their own breathing was all Mariya could hear. The beam from Kalina's flashlight flickered, revealing patches of moss, damp wood, and ancient inscriptions on the walls, marks of a place that had served many who had tried to escape something. The tunnel led them to a hidden entrance in an old cemetery. They emerged among broken tombs, rusty crosses, and a fog that seemed to be waiting for them there. Kalina had a car hidden behind the back wall. They got in and headed toward the side road. Mariya didn't ask where they were going. It didn't matter anymore. As long as it was far away, as long as they didn't have to turn back. During the trip, Kalina revealed her latest plan to cross the border into Macedonia. From there, she would find a contact who could take them to another country, a new identity, a new life. But as she spoke, Mariya noticed that Kalina was looking in the rear-view mirror more than she was looking ahead. "Are we being followed?" she asked, almost voiceless. "Not yet, but it's a matter of time." They arrived at a secluded inn near the border, a rustic place with old wood and small windows. Kalina had reservations made under another name. They paid in cash. The receptionist barely looked up. The room was simple, with 2 narrow beds and a stove that creaked with every breath. That night, Mariya did not sleep. She pretended to sleep, but her body would not turn off. At 3 in the morning, she heard footsteps in the hallway. A soft creak, then silence, and then the sound of something being placed under the door. She slowly got up and saw a small folded piece of paper. She picked it up with cold hands, unfolded. There it was, once again, the familiar handwriting, steady, unshaky. "You can run as much as you want, but in the end, everything that runs gets tiring." She looked through the crack in the door, but the hallway was empty. There were no footsteps. There were no shadows. Only the echo of the inevitable approaching. Mariya's breath caught in her chest as she stared at the crack in the door. The hallway was still, silent, but she knew someone had been there. Someone so close they could have taken her in her sleep, but they hadn't. Instead, they had left a warning, a note written like a knife, cutting through the fragile calm that had built up over the past few days. She sat up in bed silently, holding the note as if it were evidence of a crime about to happen. Kalina woke up minutes later, perhaps by instinct. Her gaze went straight to Mariya's face, as if she already knew what there was. Mariya handed over the paper without saying anything. Kalina read it silently. Her eyes narrowed. She put the note in her pocket with a quick movement. Let's not wait for tomorrow. Before the sun was up, they were back on the road. Trees sped past the windows, shadows distorted by eager headlights. Kalina drove with her eyes alert, avoiding all the main routes, as if she knew every blind spot in the country. But the tension was unavoidable. It wasn't just fear. It was the feeling that something soon was going to break. Hours later, they stopped at a nearly abandoned gas station. Kalina got out to call a payphone, leaving Mariya in the car. The girl looked around. A forgotten road, dry trees, corroded signs. Everything there seemed to say, "No one will come for you." When Kalina returned, her face was different, more closed, more somber. "The contact is gone. They said he was arrested trying to cross the border last night. Someone turned him in. Someone is clearing the way before we get there. So, what do we do?" Kalina looked at her as if she were deciding in seconds, something that took years to accept. "Let's go to Plovdiv. There's someone there who owes me a life. Maybe that'll be enough." Returning to Plovdiv was risky. It was approaching a city where Radko's name, Stanev's voice, echoed from bars, street corners, and police stations. But it was their only option. The road seemed narrower now, as if the entire country were closing in around them. With every turn, the feeling that they were being watched grew like an invisible weight on their shoulders. When they arrived in Plovdiv, Kalina took Mariya to an old building in the Kapana neighborhood, an abandoned cafe at the back of a dead-end street. There they met Ivan, a hard-looking man with a gray beard and a scar across his forehead. When he saw Kalina, he didn't smile. He just said, "I thought you were dead." "No, but she will be if you don't help." Ivan listened for a whole hour in silence. Finally, he took a sheaf of paper and began to write something. Coordinates, instructions, a name, a place in northern Serbia where a group operated illegal refugee crossings. It wasn't ideal, but it was the last route. One that no one dared to use. One that Radko might not know about. "It will cost a lot," said Ivan. "I'll pay with whatever I have," replied Kalina. "I'm not talking about money." Mariya didn't ask what he wanted. Not then. She was too tired for any more truths. The next day they set off at dawn. They had a map, a route, a new disguise. Mariya was now Kalina's daughter, named Elitsa, on her way to visit sick relatives. Everything was planned. Everything was rehearsed. But the danger is that the real world doesn't follow scripts. They were crossing an old bridge in a small town a few kilometers from the border when Kalina stopped the car abruptly. Mariya almost hit her head on the glass. She looked ahead. 3 men in dark suits blocked the road. No uniform, no identification. One of them walked slowly to the window. Kalina got out before he could even knock. "Did you lose something?" she asked, her voice controlled. The man didn't answer. He just looked at Mariya inside the car. The look wasn't one of doubt. It was one of certainty. "The girl is in danger," he said. "Leave it to us. We will get her back safely." "She's with me," Kalina replied firmly. "You know this isn't going to end well. Not for her, not for you." Mariya watched everything from inside the car, her fingers digging into the upholstery, her heart racing like a constant alarm. A second man approached. He touched the rearview mirror as if inspecting a fleeing animal. Kalina knew she wouldn't get out of there without a fight, and she would fight. But before the worst could happen, a huge truck appeared at the end of the bridge, honking loudly. The men moved away instinctively. Kalina took advantage. She shouted to Mariya, "Get down." He stepped on the accelerator. The car sped off, almost grazing the truck. The men shouted, but they didn't shoot. Not yet. Hours later, hiding in an abandoned barn, Kalina tried to contact Ivan again, but the phone didn't work. Mariya sat on the dirt floor, covered in dust, exhausted. She wanted to disappear, to evaporate, to close her eyes and wake up in a life where she wasn't being chased, where her name wasn't a contract signed in blood. Kalina sat beside her, her eyes red. "Do you think it's worth continuing to run away?" Mariya whispered. "Do you think it's worth giving up?" Silence answered for them. In the end, they both knew there was no going back. That night, Mariya woke to the sound of a phone ringing. It was Kalina's cell phone, an unfamiliar number. Kalina answered. The voice on the other end was low, tinny. "You've done well so far, but you know how it ends. The girl comes back, or you pay the price." And before Kalina could respond, the call dropped. Kalina's phone battery died seconds after the call, as if the device itself had given up on continuing. The silence that followed was unusual. It was heavy, almost physical, as if it had a body and weight and presence. Mariya looked at Kalina, waiting for a reaction, but the woman remained motionless, staring at the black screen with eyes that already knew that this was not just a threat. It was the final warning. "He's not just after you anymore," Kalina said, without taking her eyes off the space. "Now he wants to break me too." The barn was cold that morning, even with the bundles of straw draped over their bodies. The full moon cast a pale glow through the cracks in the roof. drawing lines across their tired faces. Mariya leaned against the wooden wall and tried to sleep, but her mind was spinning in circles. She wasn't sure who she was anymore. Mariya, Elitsa, a runaway, a walking debt. All she knew was that she didn't want to run anymore. She wanted to fight. She wanted to understand why so much effort was being made to bring her back, why she was so valuable. The next morning, Kalina drove her to a secluded cottage in a decommissioned village to the north, a former stronghold that had been used decades ago to protect dissidents. Now it would serve them. The basement held old equipment, old radios, half-burned documents. Mariya watched it all as if she were in a movie. But the pain in her legs, the metallic taste in her throat, and the fresh scar on her arm told her it was real. While Kalina made contact with a new intermediary, a former journalist who had been expelled from the country for exposing human trafficking rings, Mariya explored the second floor of the house. She found an old room with a bed covered in an embroidered sheet, walls with nail marks where photos had once hung, and a cracked mirror. Seeing herself there, fragmented, it dawned on her. Everything she had experienced had not been in vain. Every escape, every scar, every tear had transformed her. She was no longer the girl in the white dress. She was something new, something stronger, more dangerous even. That afternoon, bad news arrived. The journalist who was to help create a new route had been kidnapped. His body was found on the banks of the Iskar River, with signs of torture. No documents, no clues. Kalina sat at the kitchen table with her eyes wide open. She opened an old pack of cigarettes, took one out, but didn't light it. She just held it between her fingers, as a symbol of what she was resisting and not breaking. He's cleaning everything out, one by one. Anyone who gets in his way, Mariya. I thought I could beat him, but now I see we're not fighting a man. We're fighting a shadow, and the shadow is everywhere. Mariya didn't cry. She just nodded, her fists clenched on her knees. It wasn't about fear anymore. It was about coping, about not being erased. That night they decided not to sleep. The plan was to leave at 3 in the morning, cross a dense forest area to a meeting point with an international agent who could take them to a safe place. It was the last card. If it failed, it would all end there. But when Mariya went to get her backpack from her room, she realized something was wrong. The window was ajar, and on the floor, near the bed, there were footprints. Small, dirty, recent. He ran down. Kalina! Someone was here. Inside. Kalina jumped to her feet, grabbed the kitchen knife she kept hidden, and looked around. The air seemed colder, the silence thicker, and then a noise from the basement. They looked at each other. Kalina went down first. The flashlight trembled in her hand. Mariya followed close behind. The basement smelled of damp and old oil. The light revealed the boxes, the sacks of rice, the cabinet with old radios, and then the wall. A message written in charcoal. She already belongs to me, she always has. And you took her. Kalina walked up to the wall, touching the still fresh coal. That was just now. So he was here, Mariya said, her voice breaking. Or still is. Suddenly, there was a cracking sound upstairs, a soft creak like footsteps on wood. They both turned at the same time, the flashlight flickering in the darkness. They ran upstairs. The house was empty, but the back door, half open. On the doorstep, a handkerchief. Mariya's handkerchief, the one she had worn on market day. It was clean, folded neatly like a returned souvenir. Outside, the night was a moving shape. Kalina came out, armed. Mariya followed her to the trail, but no one was there. And then, the sound, the engine of a car. The two ran towards the dirt road, but they arrived too late. In the middle of the road, only the tire tracks deep in the mud, and a name scrawled in the dirt, with a twig. Radko. The sun rose slowly and heavily over the silent field. The footprints had disappeared into the hardened mud, the car marks carried away by the wind and the unforgiving weather. Kalina and Mariya stood still for minutes too long, staring at the empty road as if waiting for it to return some response, a sound, any sign that something was still under control. But there was none. Radko had been there, and he had taken with him something more than a handkerchief, a message, or a fright. He had taken away the sense of security, the illusion that escape was still possible. They went back inside the house. Kalina locked the doors, her hands shaking less than before. Fear was no longer part of the equation. It was something else now. It was calculation, survival in its purest form. They sat at the kitchen table, their eyes dry, their lips stiff. And then Kalina said bluntly, "We won't run away anymore." Mariya nodded, unsurprised. The decision had already been made silently, amid the creaking of the floorboards, the scrawling of charcoal on the wall, and the footprints in the dark. Running away was a denial, and Mariya didn't want to deny it anymore. She wanted to turn her face away. She wanted to face it. How? "Let's go to where he is." Kalina explained the plan. Ivan had gotten back to her. He had a place, a meeting place where Radko usually did sensitive business. A house on top of a hill on the outskirts of Stara Planina. It was isolated, with no cameras, no records. And if it was there, that was where it all had to end. 2 nights later, Mariya looked at herself in the cracked bathroom mirror of Ivan's house. She wore the same scarf over her hair, but not as a sign of submission. It was now armor. Her face was firm. Her eyes were cold. Her heart was beating like a war drum. Kalina watched her from afar, silent. She knew she couldn't stop her. The girl was already dead. What stood there now was a woman built on rubble, blood, and denial. They arrived at the house before dawn. Ivan stayed in the car, engine running. Kalina and Mariya walked down the side slope. The house was old, made of stone, but alive. There was light inside, signs of movement. Kalina checked the magazine of the gun she carried hidden in her waistband. It wasn't for use. It was a reminder that she could. They entered through the back door, silently, like ghosts returning to finish their own funeral. They found Radko sitting at the table as if he had been waiting for them. Next to him were 2 men. One of them was the same man who had tried to intercept them on the bridge a few days ago. The other was Mariya's father. She froze when she saw him, not with fear but with pain. The man was older. His eyes were sunken, his shoulders were slumped. But there was something about him that never changed, cowardice molded into silence. "Look who's back home," Radko said, smiling mirthlessly. Kalina took a step forward, but Mariya restrained her with a subtle gesture. It was she who spoke. "This isn't home. It never was." Radko stood up, tall, imposing, but not as threatening as he remembered. He regarded Mariya with an expression that mixed admiration and contempt. "You ran away well. You resisted even more than we expected. But in the end, everyone returns to what is theirs. I'm not yours, but your father is mine, and he gave you to me, with signature and everything." She looked at her father. He couldn't look at her. He just murmured, "Pardon me." But there was no more room for forgiveness. It had ended long ago. Mariya stepped forward. "If you kill me, you will have nothing left to show for it. I am the last asset your name carries. Destroying me is burying the very power you still pretend to have." Radko laughed. "I'm not going to kill you, girl. I never wanted that. I want you to live, but in my own way. That will never happen." Silence. Kalina drew her gun. One of the men next to Radko pulled something out of his pocket. A second. A sigh. Ivan sped off outside. A bird hit the window, and then a scream, a gunshot. But it wasn't Kalina who shot. It was Mariya. The gun had been with her all along, hidden under her scarf. A gift from Ivan, which Kalina didn't know she had accepted. The shot hit Radko in the shoulder. He fell back, screaming. The other men reacted too late. Kalina pinned them down with the speed of someone who was no longer afraid of dying. Mariya pointed the gun at her father, but she didn't shoot. "I am free, and you are just a name signed with fear." She left the house as screams echoed off the walls. Kalina followed her. Ivan was already waiting with the car in motion. They set off. On the way back, Mariya didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just looked at the horizon with the eyes of someone who didn't want to run away anymore. She didn't need to. 2 weeks later, in a different country, with a different name, Mariya entered a school for the first time. She wore simple clothes, her hair tied up, and new notebooks. No one there knew where she came from, and she didn't tell anyone. But everyone noticed something different about her. The way she looked straight into people's eyes, as if she didn't owe anyone anything anymore. And on a random street in Sofia, Kalina received a letter with no sender. Inside, a single sentence. "Now she's all hers." What would you do if your freedom cost the life of someone you love? If this story touched you, leave a comment. I would never accept this fate. Your voice can inspire others not to remain silent. Like, share and subscribe for more exciting stories that need to be told.